Welcome back to Proxam, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about how to keep your Craftworld Eldar assault units alive after combat. So a lot of us with a little bit of experience playing Eldar can pretty easily get Eldar units in close combat. It's not that difficult, and there are very many ways to do that. However, what is difficult is keeping them alive after combat. That's a little bit trickier because Eldar are typically very fragile units. So aside from Wraith Blades, Eldar units are very squishy. Even the most armored of combat units like Striking Scorpions, with a 3+ armor save and a 5+ invul save, don't really stand up well to any basic firepower. Even bolters can deal significant damage to Eldar aspect warriors. So the little bit of extra survivability that you can get from their invul save and from their decent armor is not going to be enough to save you from rapid fire range, which most of you will be in if your combat units are finished killing their first unit. There will be surrounding units that will be in rapid fire range at that point, so that's something you have to worry about. And yes, 2 units of 5 tactical marines can very easily gang up on a squad of aspect warriors and kill them very quickly without too much trouble. So what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be doing a quick review of how to get units into close combat effectively and what different strategies Eldar primarily use to get our units into close combat. And we're also going to be looking at 3 specific strategies that can help you keep your combat units alive after their first engagement, and things that I've had success with in my own games. Because once upon a time, I was a beginner player, and I did have trouble with this as well. Even in previous editions that were a little bit more friendly to close combat. And if anyone has ever played in 4th edition, you'll know what I'm talking about. Especially when it came to Tyranids and, of course, Eldar and Dark Eldar. So what we're going to do first is just go over and do a quick review on how to get units into close combat effectively. And there's 3 basic ways that we can get our units into close combat effectively without just walking. And those are transporting your units in Wave Serpents, Strategic Reserves and Webway Strike, and, of course, the Falcon Cloud Strike. The first and most obvious one is probably going to be transporting your units in Wave Serpents. Wave Serpents are the go-to transport for most assault troops. They can fit up to 12 infantry models, which means that a maxed out unit can fit in there. It is our toughest transport and can help keep your combat units alive after they assault. And I'll go into how they can do that in a later slide. And your opponent will, unfortunately, have the chance to attack you as you get into position. So the weakness of the Wave Serpent, I think, is that at some point in the battle, you are going to have to reveal yourself to the enemy army, and positioning and using terrain effectively is key to keeping that Wave Serpent alive up until that point and during that point. What you don't want is you don't want to reveal your Wave Serpent when your enemy has a lot of guns bearing down on it, because it will die and you'll never get into combat. So that is the weakness of the Wave Serpent, as opposed to some other ways of getting into combat like Strategic Reserve or Webway Strike or even the Falcon Cloud Strike. But the Wave Serpent is a great tool for many reasons, for screening, for so many things. So again, this is one of the ways, probably one of the most common ways to actually transport assault units into close combat. Now, Strategic Reserve and Webway Strike is also a very good way to get units into close combat if you want to. You do have to pay command points to bring your units in later in the game, but you can get closer to enemy units without revealing yourself too much, unlike the Wave Serpent. And you can charge out of reserve if you're positioned close enough. So this is especially easy with Webway Strike and can combo with things like Strands of Fate or Ghost Walk to ensure that you get the charge as soon as you come out of reserve. So, and just to let you guys know, with assault units, there's not much value in bringing in a unit if it cannot charge that turn. So basically, if there's no enemy units around it, there's not much of a difference between bringing an assault unit on the board and bringing a shooting unit on the board, except that a shooting unit might actually have some value that turn and an assault unit will just be sitting there. So in most cases, you want to be able to make sure that your assault unit has a proper target to charge into. Now, this does keep units safe, but it is weak to screening. So your enemy can screen it out with infantry, and it can be targeted by certain stratagems like Auspex scan. So you do have to be careful. Assault units are especially vulnerable to this because they need to get close to be able to assault. So what that means is if someone has an Auspex scan in their army, you might not want to actually come in directly in front of them. You might want to either use line of sight blocking terrain, or you might want to appear on a different spot of the board that's maybe a little bit safer and has a little bit of less shooting for your enemy to use that Auspex scan on. So you definitely don't want to drop near things like Devastators or Eradicators or things like that that can just eliminate your unit before they even have a chance to do anything. And the third option is Falcon Cloud Strike. So Falcon Cloud Strike is really cool because you can assault from reserve on turn 1 and potentially be in a position to alpha strike on your enemy. It does require planning on your part though, and it does also require a lack of screening from your opponent to get the most out of it. If your opponent doesn't screen their most vulnerable units, this can be amazing, and it can be a great way to alpha strike their greatest and most deadly threats. But if your opponent does screen it out, you might have to wait a turn or two to actually be able to use this. Savvy opponents will not let you easily take out their biggest threats turn 1 with this in combination with an assault unit. They just won't. And I think this worked on a couple of opponents in my gaming group a couple times when they really didn't have a lot of screening units in their army. But in most scenarios, you're going to be screened. So you do want to be prepared for that, but it is a good tool to have in your back pocket just in case your opponent leaves something open that they don't realize or don't recognize. You could definitely take advantage of that by coming in on turn 1 and potentially alpha striking them. Now, those are the 3 ways that Eldar basically can get into combat the easiest and with the most protection. But here are the 3 strategies to help keep your units alive after their first engagement. So that means after their charge, after they're done killing the enemy unit, which they should be doing if they're buffed properly and they're going against the right target. But the harder part is keeping them alive afterward, right? After they consolidate and there's no enemies left around them to consolidate into. This is where it kind of gets hard to make the most value out of your unit, especially if you charged into a unit that had less value than your own unit. So the 3 things are this: fighting near and around terrain or cover. This really helps keep the unit alive in certain circumstances. Good placement is always important. Using other units to disrupt and engage enemy units in the surrounding area is also key to helping them survive. And lastly, exercising patience and good timing. Do not assault in unless you have backup ready and prepared to either sweep units that are threats out of the way, or you have, in the worst case scenario, you have units to punish enemy units for killing your assault unit, in the very least. So when it comes to fighting near or around terrain or cover, try to place your unit between obscuring terrain and enemy threats after combat. This will limit the number of enemy units that can actually threaten you. So the unit that you assault into ideally will be on the opposite side of the obscuring terrain, and the enemy units in your opponent's army will be on the other side of that obscuring terrain. So you assault into an enemy unit, you kill it, and then you can consolidate as close to that piece of obscuring terrain as humanly possible so that your enemy isn't in a position to shoot you. Or they will have to spend a lot of resources crossing that terrain to be able to get to you. So either way, that's a benefit. Also, fighting in terrain, light or dense cover, can help protect you against incidental shooting. Shooting that's from whatever's left over after your turn, which, to be honest with you, again, you shouldn't be charging assault units into an area of the board where there's no other supporting units around it. You definitely want to bring shooting with you to be able to back up your assault and kill key targets so that your unit won't get shot to bits after they finish their target off, basically. Now, the next way does involve another type of unit that some people don't like, and that is Wave Serpents and Vipers. Now, this is basically just using other units to disrupt and engage enemy units in the surrounding area. So if you don't have the firepower to kill those units, or those units are too tough or whatever it is, using Wave Serpents and Vipers is a great way to help protect your combat units without sacrificing too much offensive power. And the reason why is because both of these units can be placed in the way of enemy assault units to buy time so that you can use your own assault unit to charge in again so that they're not charged themselves. Or they can also be used to assault shooting units to keep them in combat and thus not shooting your assault units. So using Wave Serpents to charge into, for example, enemy assaulting units or eradicators or something like that is very effective. Essentially, you're denying that unit the ability to shoot up your Howling Banshees or your Striking Scorpions, and they have to fall back, which means that most of the time, unless they spend command points on a certain stratagem or something like that, that unit is not going to be able to shoot. So Vipers are good at this. However, I've had issues with Vipers dying in certain circumstances in combat the turn they charge in. So Wave Serpents, I think, are the better choice, and Wave Serpents can body block much better because they're a little bit bigger than Vipers. But both work fairly well. If you do have a couple of Vipers and you see a unit of Eradicators in the corner, it's not a bad thing to charge your Viper into them. Yes, they could Overwatch, but again, Overwatch is command points, and chances are, if they're hitting on 6s, they're not really going to be able to kill the Viper. Now, they could get lucky, right? But that's something that can always happen. So you shouldn't bank on them killing the Viper, but again, they could do it with Overwatch, technically, but it would be very difficult for them to do so. So that Viper is going to be stuck in combat most likely with them until the next round, in which case they'll either have to fall back and sacrifice their shooting, or they'll have to stay in combat. And in both scenarios, your enemy is not going to be having a great time. He's going to be stuck there doing nothing while your assault unit is going to be able to clean up whatever's left. Now, unfortunately, as a result, your Wave Serpent or Viper are probably going to be in some trouble, and there's a good chance that they'll probably die at that point. But again, they've done their job. They've done what they were supposed to do. Wave Serpents especially, after they're done transporting, they're not great gun platforms because they'll probably be dinged up a little bit and therefore less accurate. So using them in this way is actually much more effective than using them as a shooting model from that point on. And lastly, of course, and this goes without saying, and this is a very important thing to learn as an Eldar player, is you have to exercise patience and good timing. Do not assault unless you have backup or if it's part of a coordinated effort. So be patient. Sometimes keeping your unit in reserve or in the transport for one more turn can open up better opportunities for you, and opportunities in which you're not going to be easily retaliated against. And never charge in unsupported. It's a very bad idea to expect an assault unit to perform well when it's up against multiple enemy threats. Eldar are good at one thing, getting in there and killing their selected target. After that, if they're not able to do anything else, or if they don't have any support in the surrounding area, they're going to fall flat. So use other units to take out key surrounding threats to your assault units before charging in. Always go in as part of a coordinated assault with other units. You never want to just throw Howling Banshees or Striking Scorpions out there alone, because that increases their chances of getting picked off, isolated, and killed. You never want to do that. And, Eldar aren't an army like Space Marines who can throw away cheap assault units and be okay. A lot of our assault units are very expensive, and they don't take a lot of resources for our enemies to kill. Things like Assault Marines, yeah, they may be a little bit more expensive than Tactical Marines, but they're not going to be too much, they're going to be harder to kill than Aspect Warriors, let's put it that way. They have better toughness, better armor typically, and they also have more wounds, right? So not only are they cheaper, but they take a little bit more resources to kill. Eldar units aren't like that. So if you go in alone with an Eldar unit, most likely what's going to happen is they're going to kill their target, and then that target probably won't be as worth as much points as them, and then they're going to die to enemy shooting. That's typically the story. So to prevent that, you really have to move as a group, move as a coordinated assault, and get the support of other shooting units to take out those key threats before they can kill your assault unit after they're done doing their job. So here's another couple tips to keep in mind. And these kind of will help you just to have in the back of your mind for when the situations arise. So if your unit can handle it, if they're going against units that are a little bit weaker, like tactical marines or something like that, not a dedicated combat unit, and you are in range of assaulting multiple units, again, of certain enemy types, this can keep you in combat longer and as such safer in the enemy shooting phase. So essentially what I'm talking about is this. If you notice that there are 2 tactical marine units right next to each other, why not, and you have a unit of 5 Howling Banshees, why not charge both of those units? Yes, they will get some attacks back against you, but both of those units are not only going to be striking last regardless because of the Howling Banshee mask, but your Howling Banshees are going to most likely do enough damage to them to where they can't really strike back that effectively, especially if you have something like an Exarch with piercing strikes, and the same thing goes for a unit of striking scorpions. Having an Exarch with crushing blows and the biting blade can be very effective at chewing through these types of targets. So if you do notice this, go for it. You can't really lose anything. You're still going to be killing the same amount of models on charge, and the upside is you'll be more protected from enemy shooting. And you'll generally just be able to cause more disruption and more damage. And next, always try to hit targets so you can make up the unit's value with. And that way, if your unit is destroyed in the enemy shooting phase, it will still have broken even and at least traded evenly so it won't be a loss to you. And yes, sometimes it's going to be very hard to protect your assault units from certain types of things. For example, characters are very hard to actually kill if they're out of line of sight and they're untargetable from your shooting weapons. Sometimes a character that's left over that you failed to kill can walk in there and kill your unit. Now that's not always the case, but in most cases that I've found, most enemy characters, at least Space Marine characters, are pretty decent in combat and can do significant damage to your unit. Now that's not to say you can't strike back and do some damage back, but it's not always possible to be able to kill everything. So you do have to keep that in mind, that when you are picking units to assault, pick a unit that you can make up its value from. And lastly, something to keep in mind when list building, and I've noticed several people using full maxed out squads of 10 aspect warriors, and you can definitely do this because they are a great target for buffs like guide and things like that. So it's definitely a good thing to do in empower, enhance, things like that really multiply the effectiveness on bigger units. But here's the thing, bigger units are generally bigger targets and much more significant threats in general. They're much harder to hide. You can't hide them as well in terrain and stuff like that. They're much easier to see. And there's a lot of other issues that bigger units have that smaller units don't. Smaller units are easier to hide and protect in general and give you a little bit more versatility. For example, if you're pushing as part of a concentrated effort on one flank and you have 10 Howling Banshees in a Wave Serpent, the advantage to having only 5 Banshees, 2 squads of 5, is that you can put one of the Banshee units out first and then you can keep the other one for later. So that can save you a tool, or I should say that could save you a unit of Howling Banshees for when you need it later on in the game. Let's say that your opponent's reserves are also coming in the next turn and that you may need something to deal with that threat. Well, you have a tool now in your back pocket that you can use for such occasions. So squads of 5 are generally, to be honest, more versatile than squads of 10, even if a squad of 10 has better buffing potential. So you do always want to look out for those kind of things too. And I'm not saying that squads of 10 are worse or bad in any way, but they are harder to keep alive and you do need to do other things to help keep them alive, essentially. And in some cases, they might be a bit overkill on certain units too, more vulnerable to blast and things like that. So you do want to be careful and cognizant of those things when you are building your lists. Sometimes it's not bad to have a unit of 5 Howling Banshees and that's it. Sometimes you don't need more than that. So just keep that in mind when you're building your lists, that squads of 10 are a little bit harder to protect and a little bit harder to keep alive. So in conclusion, I think it can be much harder to keep assault units alive after their initial charge because of their extremely close proximity to enemy units at that point, and because Eldar are generally a squishier faction too. And these compound against each other and make assault units after they charge extremely vulnerable targets. However, by using terrain, like obscuring terrain, light cover, and dense cover, using disruptive units like Wave Serpents and Vipers to pin enemy units down in combat or block them off, and utilizing patience and good timing, you can increase the chances your assault unit will survive considerably, even though there is always the chance that they could still die. And I've had scenarios where I've had an opponent shoot an indirect fire weapon across the board that I couldn't target that turn and kill my assault unit that just finished off a unit of tactical marines or a couple units of guardsmen. So it is possible for your unit to still die. There are many ways to die in this grim, dark future that is 40K, and that's one of them. Dying to something that's across the board that you can't see or shoot at and doesn't need to see or shoot. Well, doesn't need to see you to shoot you. So there is that possibility, but again, you are trying to do everything you can to increase the chances that your unit will survive. And that's really all you can do. Other than that, you just have to make sure that when you are charging into enemy units that you can choose enemy units that you will trade up from, that you can make up your points back very quickly and stuff like that. So in essence, those are the things you can do to help your assault unit survive after combat. Now, I do want to do a video showing you some basically diagrams of how this would work and how this would look on the battlefield in a later video. I want to do an advanced tactics run on assaulting and the follow-up to assaulting. I'm not going to do that today though, but I do plan on doing it in the future. If you guys are interested, let me know in the comments. And let me know what other video ideas you guys have. I know I've put out a few polls now, but I would really appreciate your guys' comments in the comment section as well, just so I can get a better gauge of it. All right, everybody, that's it for today's video. And I would love to see some comments in the comment section if you guys do have them, and let me know what other videos you guys want to see. I do also have a few pictures at the end of this video of a Farseer that I have. It's painted in the Uthway Craftworld. And the thing about me is I like to paint a lot of different things. I get very bored doing the same thing over and over again. So a lot of my units do look different. So other than my original Beal Tan color scheme, a lot of the additional stuff I get, I just paint different stuff. I just paint different colors. I've painted Iandan stuff. I've painted Uthway stuff. I've painted Samhain stuff. So I painted some Malay Talk stuff. Anyway, it's just kind of, what I like to do. But I'm going to go ahead and show you the Farseer that I've been running. It was kind of a rescue project, actually, from somebody who really just messed it up. And I found selling it on eBay for like $8. So I was very impressed to see that. Of course, most of it was broken. I had to replace a few things, but take a look at it and tell me how good it is or how bad it is. And if you want to give me some tips on painting too, I'd really appreciate that. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.